Dr. V here for our latest episode of Better Humans at Work. I'm thrilled to be joined with Malcolm Bates here, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at GFL Environmental Incorporated. Thank you so much for joining us today, Malcolm.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you for the invite. Love to talk to you more about what I'm doing.
Quick little backstory about Malcolm and I. So we met last year at the SHRM Inclusion Conference in San Diego, and this man knows how to bring a community together. I'll tell you what, we had the best time one night at this Afro Soul Jam session.
Yeah,
He
yes.
took over the whole corner of the club. It was all people from the conference. There was just so much love in that room. You're just such a wonderful community builder, Malcolm. I'm just super
Thank you.
grateful for you.
Thank you. I was glad to share that time and be a part and meet so many wonderful professionals, meeting you, lifelong friend, lifelong professional person for me. So thank you for accepting the invite.
I'm so glad I did. So we have a lot of people out there watching who are in DEI and HR functions. And so can you share a little bit about your current role and just like your overall DEI journey and what got you into this work?
Yeah, so currently I am the director for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at GFL Environmental. And of course, we are a company that does all things environmental, emergency, liquids, solids, anything that has an end life, we touch it. And so we're more than just what you see when someone picks up solid or what they call waste or trash. We actually anything that's been created has to have an end life, and we're partly a part of how to get that recycled and continue to use that. A little bit about how I got into this work. I was, I was at Mazda before. I worked for Dell prior to, before that I worked at American National Insurance, and been in this work primarily since I was in college. I would say I would like to experience this work ever since I was a child. But I didn't know what it was. But when I got to college, I worked with the assistant vice president of multicultural student services. And so I did a lot of volunteer work there. I worked with a lot of groups, and I began to get into higher education, student affairs, and really started diving into what at that time, what people don't know is called multiculturalism, right? It wasn't popular like it is today, but really jumped into multiculturalism. And what did that mean for me to be involved with multiculturalism and understanding different aspects, different POVs, point of views, and things like that? So I continued that work, continued to make sure that I could advocate for others, I can understand myself even more, and continue my education work and begin to do my bachelor's. My master's was a grad assistant in the same office of multicultural student services, led some leadership development teams for some all of the what we call the multicultural groups. We had over 34 groups, and so I was managing those groups, advising those groups, and just felt a lot of a sense of belonging in that space. And so I began to move in higher education, and then I moved over to corporate, and even more of a positive challenge, but a different swing. And so it's really been great. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 15 plus years in this space, is really creating spaces and creating strategies for people to belong.
I love that. And 15 years, you truly are a veteran in this work. I remember a conference that we were at, they were talking about the class of 2020 and just how the field itself just blew up. And so many people were entering the space for the first time and not really having the experience and skills necessary to do such challenging work. And
Right.
Over your 15 years, and especially over the last 3 years, like what have been some like major changes you've seen in this space, either good or bad?
So I think some of the major changes, what I've seen is, words matter in this area, in this field. Words do matter. And what I've seen is, and it's a positive thing and negative thing. What I've seen is the change of terminology of what we do and what we are and who we are. We went from multiculturalism. It came from affinity groups to multiculturalism, diversity training. Then it went on to, of course, the origin was affirmative action, but now we're calling it, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It was diversity and inclusion. Now it's diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. You even have some that say diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. There's so many things that are a part of this conversation. So one of the things that's changed is the meaning in the words. And
Mm,
you can say that we're elevating to understand even more about the space that we're doing, but it also is confusing to people who don't know what this work is. There's no home base for it to stay where it's at. Um, so that's some of the things that I've seen is the words. A lot of things that I've seen, especially after the social justice issues, are the 138% in what we call DEI today, right?
mm,
And I think that when that changed, a lot of companies said, "Hey, we need to get DEI," but really, they didn't really want DEI. They probably needed kind of anti-racism training, right? It really wasn't particularly DEI because those are two different aspects of approaching the business and approaching people. But I've seen just this terminology, right? If that was the biggest thing, it's the terminology and the understanding. And even with myself, spending multiple rounds of information and time to demythify what DEI is and to say what it is and what it's not. So I think it's just some of those things I've seen change. I've seen, the last point in the changes of I've seen people who've never been in the field before, all of a sudden are D&I experts, and that's great that people want to join in, but it's also could be problematic because when you're dealing with human behavior and you're dealing with people and you're dealing with terminology, sometimes it can be hurtful in the long run. So all those things have changed, right? When it was multiculturalism for me, I couldn't find a soul. But now it's bumped up to DEI. We have them all over the place.
I think it's interesting the distinction you call out with anti-racism and DEI. For those watching out there, like how would you delineate the two? Because I think you're right, especially in corporate in the last 3 years,
Yeah.
they kind of got jumbled together.
Yeah, so anti-racism would be really just the teachings and the conversations of, and I use lightly words, right, just to keep it really base, but just understanding what it means not to be racist, right? And when we talk about being racist, it's really a construct of power levels and understanding how you use those powers and those privileges against maybe a unrepresented group or an historically looted group, and how that comes off in the power that you display with that group, depending on your status of power. And so what has happened is when George Floyd happened, of course, we know that happened, and everyone said, let's get DEI. Because we go back to this terminology and this misunderstanding of what DEI is, they particularly said, well, everyone's involved in this conversation. Yes, but particularly with George Floyd and the historical factors of, you know, some groups, it was really based on, well, what is the construct here between America or individuals and groups and Black people?
Mm,
And that was the real conversation that should have been happening there. But because we didn't have this information, this terminology, this practice, people said, well, we need diversity, equity, inclusion. We need to understand how everybody works. And that's fine. But there's two different missions there, right? And so it's really just focusing on the construct and the behavior of how America and Black people are mixed in this conversation of equity, inclusion, justice, restorative justice, those things.
mhm. Yeah, we talk about, in our book, the difference between like targeted DEI and
Mhm.
universal DEI. And so
Right,
like concepts like inclusion and treating everyone in a way that they feel like they belong, and like, equitable systems and processes, that's universal. But when we
right.
start getting into specific groups like,
Mhm.
the Black community, or just,
Yeah,
racial groups in general, gender, that's when we get more targeted, and you really need both to do it right. And
dude.
I feel like a lot of organizations tend to miss the mark on that. They want to do one or the other.
Yeah, no, and spot on. And I want to say shout out to your book. Loved it. Read it. I was excited to see that piece in there as well. But you're right. There needs to be this level of DEI. It needs to be this level of a balance of anti-racism, but it also needs to be an understanding of levels of intersectionalities and how
Mhm.
all the systems really how they oppress upon people in different areas in their lives, to who they are and the identities, that the perspective of who they are.
So, we're really covering the gamut here today, talking about DEI, anti-racism,
Yeah.
intersectionality, and then you put a global perspective on top of that, and it
Ooh,
increases the complexity so much. And so that's really the focus of our conversation here today: global DEI.
yeah.
Full transparency, it's a miss in the book, and we call it out too in the preface. We say this is really US centric because that's where our clients live, that's how we can speak to it, but also we just knew it'd be a whole book in and of itself when it comes to the global perspective of DEI. And so let's just start foundations, like how would you define, or like how do you conceptualize what global DEI is, different from this more US centric understanding that most of us have.
Yeah, so you're spot on. I'm glad you say that. The complexity of global DEI, especially if you're in the States and then trying to venture out to different areas, is very, very complex. And to your point, working with Mazda, working with Dell, working with now GFL, all these global areas, one of the things that is important to understand with global DEI is to make partnerships with individuals who have your passion in those areas. Take the moment to learn and see what spaces are created, and understand that everything doesn't have to centralize where you're from. Like I'm here in the US, it doesn't need to centralize from where I'm from. And it's okay for you to be kind of the learner in the situation and hand the reins over to that area and support where you can. But I'm getting, to global conversations, it is very complex. You have to take your time and make sure you have the right conversations with the right people, and make sure that you're taking yourself into account and negotiating your prejudices or your biases, and learning a little bit about all of the subcultures within the culture, right? Because they all have them there. And it's very complex. It takes time. It takes a very good strategy to deliver a vehicle that creates spaces for these areas to thrive.
And going back to, targeted universalism, like what are the universal things with global DEI that can apply across whatever geographic area? And what are the targeted approaches that you give that leeway? And so how have you been able to sort of delineate the two in your work?
So for me, how I'm able to do that is I need to build a vehicle. I think it's important to build a vehicle where you can deliver the conversation. In a lot of work, when we talk about global or even local, we have a strategy of what we should be doing in initiatives. But what we fail to do is actually create the vehicle on how to deliver those initiatives. And what I've learned, one of the aspects in global is the vehicle can be consistent across the board, and you have to create different spaces at different times at different levels for each area from a global standpoint. Um, so, what mobilizing one of the key points, mobilizing your grassroots base. How do you do that? When you're in a global conversation of DEI, your first goal is not to go all the way up to leadership and say, let's start this executive council. That's not it. The leadership has to have something to invest into. And we make the mistake and say, well, it's always from the head all the way down. No, they have to be able, they don't know what they don't know. And they don't know where to invest their time and resources. So you have to go build that. And how do you do that? You have to um, take your foundation, your grassroots level, and you have to really organize that group. You have to organize that foundation. You have to engage the foundation group. The next level is now how do you make space and engage and form your mid management? We know that mid management controls the culture. They have the power to make and break a culture. So you have to create a space globally for all of these mid managers to connect on some way, some way. How you do that is you have to lock in on your company's core competencies and their values. and their principles. That is your anchor to getting all of the mid managers to say, hey, if one of our principles is collaboration, then we're going to anchor to that in collaboration and build a program around leadership development for the mid level for locking in on collaboration. Now we've created a strategy for the mid level. Now you can go up to the executive level and get sponsors and build out that executive committee because you've given them something to invest in. You have organized your volunteer base from the grassroots. You have now organized your mid level and given them to anchor to. Now you can do that same thing for the executive school.
It's interesting because, we always talk about it starts at the top. But I think it's just the initial kind of go ahead that starts at the top, right? So
Yeah.
realizing you need to hire Malcolm and build a team under them,
Mhm.
right? And
Mhm.
that's the start.
That's the
But then
start.
all the work after that is coming from the bottom because these leaders, as you said, don't know what they don't know or don't know the right direction. And so allowing you to do your work and then build that grassroots effort, I think that's like a really beautiful execution strategy, as opposed to just looking at these senior leaders who don't have the DEI expertise and don't even know where to begin. And then we're doing all these random trainings and will actually result in any sort of impact or outcomes.
Yeah, no, you're right. And that's why most DEI programs fail because we feel that we have to organize the executive leadership. We really don't have to. The the investment comes from the leadership. The go ahead and do what you need to do comes from leadership. What we need to be strategizing is how do one of the KPIs that I have for DEIB here at GFL is keep people interested.
Mm.
That's the KPI. Keep people interested, keep people engaged. And how we do that is that we have to have a mechanism and a strategy for people to volunteer from the base level. And what does that look like? What do your subcommittees look like? How do you involve the grassroots level for them to participate in that passion? What programs do you have that mature over the 3 to 5 years? What areas, what operations do you put in to give a 360 feedback to those employees? And how do you adjust? Not only just surveys, but you're taking a hard look, boots on ground, and seeing what's working and what's not. How do you incentivize employee business resource groups to lock into the business principles and the business anchors and give them space where they can develop and grow? Those areas take a lot of time. You got to operationalize those because once you operationalize a base like mine, like we have over 20,000 employees, if I can just operationalize 20% of that, we are moving culture. It's going to catch fire, right? So once we do that and we move up to the leadership, they have to listen to the base. The mid level has to listen to the foundation. The mid levels and the executives has to listen to the mid levels. So it all works in that strategy. And I would say, and from a global perspective, now you have everybody collaborating on one principle, which is the core values of the organization that you're working for.
Yeah. And those aren't negotiable. I feel like a lot of time
Hmm.
people think DEI is negotiable or it's a political stance or, it's a nice to have. But when it comes to the core values and mission of an organization, that's non-negotiable. That's why you're there. And so I think it's really smart to tie those two pieces together. Earlier, you were talking about the complexity of doing global DEI work. What have been some successes or wins in doing this work for you? I know you're relatively new at this organization, but just any wins you've had from managing DEI globally, because I know it's a tricky business. For
Yeah.
sure.
I'm glad you had that. Some of the wins that I've had is really finding those key allies, those key advocates within the organization. One of my principles of doing this work for so long and doing global work for so long is I do not go seek out people. If you have to convince them to come, you have to convince them to stay. What I do is I will allow the natural, genuine construct to work itself where people can say, I want to volunteer. And so some of the quick wins for GFL is when I did get hired, a lot of people raised their hands to be a part of this DEI B conversation. And typically, you go into an organization, you have to build this volunteer base. It's already here. We already have hundreds of people who are willing to be a part of this work. So what I've done is magnitude myself over, 1,000 times in each area. And all I have to do is organize the strategy for them to keep growing and develop. And so quick win for me is that, we have people in all areas, Eastern Canada, Western Canada, Florida, all over, that are really passionate about this work. And I'm able to work with them and bring some strategies together and deliver what we need to deliver and create those spaces.
I love that. And we take a similar approach to our work here at Mattingly. Like, we don't hard sell just because, an organization, they need to come to us. The work is hard enough, and having to convince people to be
Yes.
engaged and be involved, like,
Yes.
that's, you're already dead in the water. And so it
Yes.
sounds like y'all are starting from a strong culture where you already have people who are on board and, excited to do the work.
It's everyone has a passion, and I would say this to each DNI practitioner, expert professional. Everyone in the organization, no matter who they are, they just want to be heard. Everyone just wants to be heard. If you don't create the space for those people to be heard, then what you have is a lot of destructive behaviors. And when you create that space for people to be heard, they're able to now become a volunteer and say, wow, this feels great. How can I get others to be a part of this conversation? Because it feels great to be heard. It feels great to be empowered. It feels great to be a part of a movement, a conversation to impact culture. So that's one of the things that we're doing at GFL, and it is on fire.
Have you, like, it's interesting. I never realized how much, like, branding and marketing was so important for DEI efforts. Have you been, like, rebranding DEI in any way that makes it resonate more with your global
Yes.
audience?
It's funny you say that because we have. So one of the things that I do when I go into organization is I get a very welcoming tagline to what DEI is.
Mm.
So for us, it's green for life, and so our tagline is greening together. So us greening together. But what I've done in the movement and marketing DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, I've removed that phrase actually. We are now called culture and engagement. And the
Mm.
reason why is because we're focusing more on concepts of DEI, but we are focusing on the humanity piece of understanding who you are, the space you occupy, and the impact that you have with people in those spaces. And it all comes down to the humanity piece. It all comes down to what type of culture do you have in the organization, and the engagement, the employee experience, the employee engagement. And one of the things I've always said is there's a difference of an employee working for you than working at your company than working for your company.
Mm.
And so we're trying to delineate those two through our core values and our principles. But when we come to culture and engagement, that's just what it is. Engaging the culture and the culture engaging you. What I found is because of the social constructs, especially here in the US, when you say DEIB and all that tax of came to it, one, it's very complicated for people to understand. And number two, it puts people's guards up. It makes it feel like there's an exclusive faction to it, and it's really not. It's really inclusive. But for me to spend hours, days, months, and Sundays trying to demythify DEIB and what it really means really takes away from the real work that I want to do. And so, if I need to break down or move any feeling of comfortability to that, I'll use the word culture and engagement. Still doing DEI work, but just call it culture and engagement. And what I found is a lot more people open up to that and say, "Wow, I really like that."
Well, and it just aligns so much with what I like to say. Like, good DEI work is just good people management. It's just good talent management. It's
That's
just a
it.
good way of, it's running a business where you take care of your people and they take care of you back. And so call it whatever you want. And if it's going to help get people on board more quickly at the end of the day, it's still authentic, because doing DEIB well does lead to higher engagement, better workplace culture, and all the benefits that result in that. So
Large return on investment for DEI work. I hope people understand this is nothing soft. I tie everything I do to the business. But if you just take an example of a retention rate, if you're losing 25 to 35% of your organization, if you're an organization, you're losing money. And then when you hire new people, you have to train them. And so there are going to be mistakes. You're losing money. Your profit margin becomes smaller and smaller by the type of culture and engagement you have. So it's important to keep great talent. It's important to keep people in those areas and work with what you have and recruit, continue to recruit people who add to that. So there's definitely a margin factor to this. I hope people understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the companies that don't are going to lose in the end. That's my take on it. The de-investment in DEI right now, it's just the companies that were doing it for formative reasons in the first place, and they're not going to be able to attract and retain top talent as a result. Oh.
It'd be Blockbuster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're going to be
They're not around. They'll be like Blockbuster. It's an important faction. I believe one time, and just in my experience, I was at a shareholders meeting at some other company, and they never brought up DEI at one time. But when I did speak on the mic, I said, it's amazing that you all want these returns. You want the financial strategy to work, and you've asked all these in-depth questions to how you're going to make the margin. But no one talked about the people who are going to get you these margins, the people who are going to get you the strategy to work. And if you don't take care of the people, you won't get any money for your organization. So that's how we bring it home. That's how I talk about culture and engagement. We have to be able to engage employees to have a great engagement, giving them the tools they need, and experience, giving them the place where they want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I could talk with you all day long, but we should probably wrap it up for our viewers out there. And
Okay.
so to summarize, what would be like 3 pointers or pieces of advice you'd give for those out there who want to take a more global perspective to their DEI approach?
So I got just a few points, and I'll say this from a global standpoint, and it's not going to sound all DEI, but it's very helpful in the long run. One is collaboration. You have to collaborate with your partners within the organization, people out in areas. Collaboration. You do not know it all, and you will not know it all. You need to collaborate. Build your political capital. I know that sounds crazy, but build your political and professional capital. That means trust, follow through, follow up, say what you're going to do, create partnerships, create allyships, create those strong bonds, create a network. You need to be able to build that up. Another one is be a learner. You have to learn, continue to grow, learn the business. D&I practitioners, please learn the business. That is so critical in the work that you do. Learn the modes of the business. Learn where those are strategically, and partner with your HR all the way through to find out what the people operations look like. And lastly, and I know I said 3 points, lastly is this: strategically create spaces that motivate and support the DEI progress. You have to create those spaces. If you do not create the spaces, not only for people to congregate and talk, you have to create strategic spaces for DEI to mature. And if you don't do that, you'll be always in this place of what's next. And you don't want to be in that space.
I love it. I asked for 3, you give me 4. That's how you roll, Malcolm. So I'm so grateful that we are connected, that you are doing the work that you're doing. GFL is so lucky to have you there building out their DEI program. And just thank you so much for sharing your expertise and many years of experience with our audience out there today.
I will. Thank you for having me. And I'm here as always. I love to be a part of any conversation or question, and success on your business. And I love what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. I love it.
Thank you, Malcolm. Thanks for all you do to help us be better humans at work.